Yep. Yeah, I'm one of the 5 co-directors of the Hudson Valley Coalition for Life, and I actually was going to address directly some of the things Mr. Ryan said last week. But I really want to stick, I do want to stick with the First Amendment issue here, the free speech issue. I did go through very carefully the draft, which I think was the 5th draft, and I want to make a couple of points regarding this, primarily the buffer zones. Because I think the thing that this adds on to, the laws that are already in force, both the federal face law and the New York face law, is this idea of buffer zones. And while I read that this law is modeled on the Colorado law, whoever gave advice on this left out several other buffer zone laws that have not been passed muster with the Supreme Court. I have here the Hill versus Colorado buffer law that you model it on. Left out was the Schenck versus New York pro-choice network buffer zone law. Now the Hill versus Colorado law passed in the Supreme Court by a vote of 6-3. It's worth mentioning that 2 of the people who voted with the majority there, Supreme Court Justice Rehnquist and Justice O'Connor, are no longer on the court. They've been replaced by Supreme Court Justice Roberts and Justice Alito. That might change the view of the court on things like buffer zones. But buffer zones by no means have been found to be legal even in front of the Supreme Court in all jurisdictions. It does depend on the wording and that sort of thing. Schenck versus Pro-Choice Network of Western New York, which I have here, was found to be, the buffer zone, the floating buffer zone was found to be unconstitutional by a vote of 8-1.
That was a floating buffer zone in an injunction as opposed to a statute, right?
No, it was a statute. It was in a statute.
Where?
In Western New York. That's the title of it. I have
what statute?
That you got me on. But I do have it here if you'd like to look through it. And I do want to I want to review what the law already says. And I'm using here the description of the freedom of access to clinic entrances from the National Abortion Federation website, which is the trade organization for abortion providers.
Before you go into that, did you say at the beginning of your remarks that it was your opinion that the version that is being relied upon for this particular proposal passed constitutional scrutiny?
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, I thought you did.
I said that.
What did you say about what was used as a model for this?
Somewhere in the letter, cover letter here,
yeah,
you mentioned that a more restricted version of this floating buffer zone enacted in Colorado has already been upheld by constitutional.
I thought you concurred with that.
No, I don't.
Oh, you didn't. Oh, okay.
No, I think the issue of buffer zones, whether they're floating or fixed, is very much up in the air.
I didn't ask you what you thought. I think your statement. You said something about the court's view of the particular version that was relied upon when this was drafted.
The vote was 6-3.
For what?
Upholding the buffer zone.
Upholding the buffer zone. And so, what was your initial comment about what is being included in here?
That I said that by no means is it settled law that floating buffer zones or fixed buffer zones are constitutional. That there have been different cases decided regarding in different circumstances. One of the things that always comes from any of these circumstances, any of these buffer zones that have been put in, is there's usually been serious, nonviolent civil disobedience at these different sites.
Okay, you continue on with your comments, because obviously I'm not making myself clear.
Well, I'm glad to listen if you want to.
No, you continue on, continue.
All right, so FACE, and this includes the New York FACE law, is very similar, almost identical. Prohibits, and I'm just going to be quick, any activity that blocks access, trespassing, acts of physical violence, vandalizing, threats of violence, and I'll read that. This is again from the National Abortion Federation website. For example, in 1996, a woman was found guilty of a FACE violation for yelling through a bullhorn to a doctor. Remember, Robert, remember Dr. Gunn, this could happen to you. Dr. Gunn was murdered in Florida. Stalking a clinic employee, arson or threats of arson, bombings or bomb threats. Then they say, what does FACE not prohibit? FACE protects protesters' First Amendment right to free speech. Clinic protesters remain free to conduct peaceful protests, including singing hymns, praying, carrying signs, walking picket lines, and distributing anti-abortion materials outside of clinics. Is shouting outside of a clinic a FACE violation? No, it's not. In fact, I will pass out an address for a YouTube video where the person making the video was a clinic escort, and she has a subset. This is clearly a violation of FACE. There was a woman outside calling out into the clinic, and that's allowed. That's allowed under FACE. Noise levels cannot exceed local laws. Is the use of photography or videotaping prohibited? Taking someone's picture, either still or moving, without their consent is not an act of force or a threat of force. This is not a FACE violation. So FACE is very clear here, as is the New York State FACE, where I can only find one case that was prosecuted in February 2001, where people who had made threats, sent in things looking like bombs to the clinic, done all sorts of things, scurrilous acts, were finally found under New York State FACE and were prosecuted. The issue, one of the issues for us is, well, you mentioned also going through the bill. This is very vague. If someone is harassed, what does that mean? How do you define harassment? If I walk up and say, Miss, would you mind taking this? It's discussing what goes on the 11th floor here, and you say no, and I say, oh, please, I'd really like you to take it. Is that harassment? When she said no, and I say, oh, please, I'd really like you to take it? That's a rhetorical question.
Well, for purposes of legislation, you asked the question, what do you mean by harass? It is included in the definition section.
I'm looking. Harass shall mean to engage in a course of conduct or to repeatedly commit acts which alarm or seriously annoy another person. Now, where do you draw the line as what alarms someone or seriously annoys them? Where do you draw that line? That's very vague. Follow and harass another person within 25 feet of the premises of a reproductive health care facility. If this lady is walking down the street and I'm walking next to her talking to her, is that harassment? How are you going to make a judgment on that?
What if she says she doesn't want to talk to you?
Well then, I would say that it works the same way it would work if I was pamphleteering for Mr. Burton at the Croton Railway Station. Okay? And I have a pamphlet up here, and the person goes like this. I would stop. That's what I would do. Right? That's what I would do. And I think that's the way we all act at these clinics. But it's very vague. And sure as shooting, if this law goes into effect, were to go into effect, and it will be challenged, we will. One of the interesting things was in the prior discussion of the ANC, whatever that was, there was an issue of how much it would cost to put something on a referendum. Mm-hmm. How much is it going to cost to defend this law when the American Center for Legal Law and Justice, the Thomas More Society, the Alliance Defense Fund, which won $10,000 8 years ago here, won a settlement. How much is it going to cost for Westchester County lawyers to defend this? Don't we have other things to do in Westchester County? Is the economy going so well that we have to put our time into this?
I hate to interrupt you. We do have a few more speakers, and I want to get them in.
I don't want to. Can I touch?
You made some good points. So
Thank you. I'd like to just touch on Mr. Ryan's comments last month, because I think they're important to touch on. Mr. Ryan spoke for, 3 or 4 minutes, I think, about concerns about specifically walking down the street in Yonkers. So, I and my son on Sunday went down to Yonkers, and we measured out how much space there is on the sidewalk. Now, Your concern was, let's see if I can find it here.
My concern was, do organizers there, are they sensitive to it, and do they understand their responsibility to keep the crowd back to allow
Right, sure.
for traffic going back, pedestrian traffic going back and forth?
Right.
That was the question.
Well, let me just give you a little experience I have with other demonstrations that I've participated in on other issues.
Well, how about these types of demonstrations?
Well, let's say,
This
street
issue
demonstrations, activism.
At that building? That was the question.
I think it's, you don't want to discriminate against pro-life speech, correct?
I was talking about whether or not people who are pedestrians,
Right.
when there's a demonstration, if the organizers of the particular group that demonstrates there, if they routinely keep their people
Right,
back
sure.
to allow clearance for people to come and go on the
Well,
sidewalk.
of course, the answer to that is yes. And in fact, I went down and measured off, based on those slabs. At the door, which is about, quite wide, it's a wide door, I think it's about 10 feet wide.
Right.
The distance from the wall to the curb
Curb, right.
is 17 feet 10 inches. The front slab is 5 feet 10 inches. If you look at the video, in fact the picture's there, I think if you looked at that, you'd see the front slab is completely clear. It's 5 feet 10 inches, that includes the curb. The curb runs along there, I measured it, 4 to 6 inches. So you're talking about 5.5 feet space. Now, 50 yards south of there, on South Broadway, there's that little memorial there, the steps that go up. You're familiar with that maybe. How wide is the street there? The street there is 7 feet wide, but you couldn't walk on part of it because you have the meters, traffic meters. The distance from the wall to the traffic, to the meters, to the parking meters, is 5 feet 10 inches. So the space in front of the clinic, right at the door, was 5 feet, was virtually identical. Virtually identical to the space on the sidewalk 50 or 80 yards south. Now, the building comes out a little bit.
How about 10 yards south?
I'll get it.
You got it.
Yeah, right,
The
yeah.
picture right there.
You led me into the question, yeah. The answer on that is that when you move down to the end of the building, the last slab is 3 feet 11 inches wide, because the slab's narrow, okay? If you look closely at a shot from the other side, there was actually more space than that. But I want to point out that if you go to a demonstration, as I do frequently in New York City, whether it's for the Pax Christi Stations of the Cross, Peace and Justice, or whether it's other issues, the police generally ask you, when you're stopped, to leave space for one person to pass through. So we have, compared with other localities, this is plenty of space here for people to pass by. Now I understand that this could look to some people. There's a crowd of 120 people out there expressing their free speech. And frankly, I'm not going to apologize. I wish there were 120 people out there every day. Because again, that's our First Amendment right. It may make people a little uncomfortable, but that's the price you pay for free speech. We saw a demonstration of free speech in Wisconsin a few months ago, where for 6 weeks, several thousand people occupied the state building and the grounds outside. They could all have been arrested, I presume, for trespassing, disturbing the peace, all sorts of issues. And they weren't. That was a good example of I'm looking for a word here,
Tolerance,
restraint and tolerance, right. Now, you have to, we are entitled to this. We are entitled to walk up the street. We are not entitled to be loud, rude, obnoxious, inconsiderate. But you get the feeling here, at least I did at the last meeting, was that was kind of the default position that certain people had. The people at these events are rude, inconsiderate, and are loudish. And that's simply not the case. There have been no complaints about about New Rochelle. Ms. Shimsky, I'm wondering, where are you from that you said you've had complaints? What towns are that?
Greenberg.
Greenberg. At the Greenberg Planned Parenthood, there have been complaints?
The complaints have come from all Women's Health and White Plains.
Well, I mean, there's pictures of all women. By the way, all of it, this is my my video, when I say my, HVCL, Hudson Valley Coalition for Life, all the video and pictures from White Plains and Yonkers were from our organization. It's interesting that the pro-choice people use our stuff.
Mr. Faranda, I think you've made your points on the First Amendment. We appreciate them. I would like to now ask Sister Mary Claire and Sister Mary Ann to come up. They've been very patient. Yes, one question from Mr. Burton.
This is Greenberg.
Sure, Mr. Burton?
As I asked Mr. Maldo and Ms. Anderson, are you part of a, do you yourself represent an independent group? Do you have a group around you, or are you part of Mr. Maldo's larger group?
We are all, Hudson Valley Coalition for Life, Inc. is a C4. It's about 20 or 22 years old. We try to coordinate things. We have a newsletter. We will put our name on when other groups are sponsoring an event. We will co-sponsor it.
But you are, as such, you are a separate group.
We're separate.
Okay.
We're separate.
You made reference to the buffer zone question.
Mm-hmm.
You seem to have very serious concerns about the legitimacy of a buffer zone requirement at all.
Yes.
Am I misunderstanding
No.
you? That you do not necessarily feel yourself, speak for yourself, that a buffer zone is an appropriate requirement under the law?
I think it's always inappropriate, and I think that's what federal law, which was aimed to quell nonviolent civil disobedience at clinics, felt it unnecessary to legislate buffer zones, as did the New York State law, which follows FACE. So I think buffer zones are very much are inappropriate.
And have you ever participated in an event where you have in fact deliberately or accidentally broken the line on a buffer zone?
No, I've never been. I've never gone to that I know of. Gone to a facility where they had a buffer zone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Anything else?
John, I just
No, we're going to move on. We want to get people.
Mr. Ryan?
just a definition
Yeah.
question. Just very quickly, I don't know, in 25 words or less, how would you define a floating buffer zone? I mean, if I don't know what it is, what is your definition?
Well, the definition is right in here. It's within 6 feet of anyone who's approaching the clinic.
Okay.
Come within 6 feet of someone.
And if somebody couldn't grasp the concept of floating, what does that mean?
They couldn't grasp the concept.
Of floating? How would you describe it?
I just described it. If I'm entering a clinic, then no one should come up to
So
me.
you're moving along.
I'm moving along,
Okay.
and in other words, you cannot approach me within 6
Right,
feet
that
unless I
zone
indicate.
kind of floats with you.
Yeah, right. Right. As opposed to a fixed zone. Now, I pointed out that there's a fixed zone for the floating buffer zone in this. It says within 80 feet, you cannot approach within 6 feet. Now, in White Plains, that's a moot point, because you're headed to a building, they're probably going to the Bank of America on the first floor, which is an interesting point, because what if people decided to protest all those countrywide mortgages they have there? How would that affect the,
On that note,
Well, no, I mean, this is the point, though. The point is, this targets pro-life free speech, as opposed to other speech. Thanks.
thank you, Mr. Moran. Appreciate your comments. Sisters, thank you. Patience is a virtue, and you've exhibited that virtue to the utmost today. Who would like to speak first?
I'll speak first. I'm Sister Mary Claire, and I'm from Sleepy Hollow. And I have been to the abortion clinic in